Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Altispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done, and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour to be a part of the program. It is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name's Noah Chalaya. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you this morning. This evening, as another episode of the Ask Noah Show kicks off this hour. Joining me, my co-host, Mr. Steve Ovens. Welcome in, sir.
Are you enjoying the weather so far, Noah?
I am enjoying the weather so far. Here's the other thing I'm enjoying. I'm going to ride our collective audio levels like crazy. I've held off on what would be probably a not great choice on my part. But I have do you know what a bass drop is?
I do not.
Okay. So basically, we know what frequencies speakers respond to. And I came prepared tonight, Steve. Gotten a couple of feedback. People saying, hey, we want to make sure that audio is loud and booming. So we're going to make sure that audio is loud and booming tonight, right into people's ear holes. But then the other thing is, if I really need people's attention, I have an audio file that will play the lowest of lows. And if there's some poor soul who is driving a car that maybe has speakers that are on the fritz, it will do them in. And that's nothing against them. It's just, I'm on a mission, Steve. I'm a man on a mission. It's really what it amounts to.
Taking that feedback to heart.
I am. So I understand that you fell down the rabbit hole this week with AI trying to get it to calculate how far you're running. Tell me about that.
So I suppose I've been looking at trying to better understand various bits of how to utilize AI as a tool, because I don't think that it's going to go away. I think that at some point there'll probably be some sort of crash, and the way that the general public consumes it may change. But in terms of how it's going to impact searching and how tech people go about their jobs, I think it's here to stay in some form. And so instead of burying my head in the sand, so I'm not a big AI hype machine, but I'm also not an AI denier. So I've been trying to just wrap my head around, like, how do these things work, and just generally trying to get a better understanding so that I have an understanding of what's happening in the world around me.
Take me along for the ride.
Sure. Why not? And maybe some of the audience too. I'm sure that there are people in the audience that are much further ahead in their reading and their understanding of all the things. But I'll share with what I know. And so as part of that, I have a Python program that I wrote 8 years ago, maybe 9. I'm not exactly sure. Quite a while ago. I have had Garmin watches for well over a decade, and I like to store my data locally. So back then I wrote this program to go essentially talk to the API and then dump it into Influx. So I have all my running data going back to 2018. So this past week, I put on my shoes to do a run, and I noticed the treads were wearing, and I thought, I haven't had these very long. I wonder how long it's been since how many miles have I put on my shoes since I bought them? And the reason why this is important is if you're an avid runner, you know that you should be rotating your shoes every X number of miles or kilometers in order to avoid injury and stuff like that. Because if you get uneven wear in your shoes, that'll change the gait at which you run, and then your body will compensate and you'll get injured. So I could have looked at my own script and then figured out how to write the query to go into Influx and say, return the data for walking or running between this date and this date. And then I would have to do a conversion because it's stored in meters. And then I would have to aggregate all the data together, and then I could get my number.
It's the way like our grandpas did it back in the day.
Sure. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? I could have absolutely done that and gone on my way. But I thought, no, this seems like a thing that I should learn how to. It seems like a good use case, right? Being able to ask the local AI, how many miles did I run between this date and that date? That seems like a thing that we probably would use AI for. So that's kind of where I went down the rabbit hole for. And that took me on kind of a roundabout trip that kind of confirmed some of the conversation that we've been having in the after show about skills and MCPs and how models react to things and how different models do different things. So, side note for you, Noah, one of the things I didn't tell you was I went and tested 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 models. I tested 14 models, giving it that same kind of query of like, I want to know how many miles I ran between this time and this time. And so what I did was I built an MCP server so that I could talk to InfluxDB and also have up-to-date data, right? But on top of that, I wrote a skill describing how you should use the MCP server so that it was not ambiguous. This is what you do. These are the endpoints you call. Like, this is the type of information that I'm going to ask, all that sort of stuff. So I really boxed it in, trying to take the idea of reasoning out of it. Because one of the things that changes between models is how well does it reason? Or does it reason well at all? Does it follow instructions? Is it good at tool handling and stuff like that? And so part of the experiment was, after I had got the set in the way that I wanted it to, I wanted to see how the different models handled it and whether they were slow or how well they did. And some of the results really surprised me. Most of the models actually were able to accomplish the task. You would think, well, that's such an easy task. All of the models should have been able to do it. But that turned out not to be the case, because the MCP server allows you to specify dates. And I had 3 different models that would just continuously pass null as the date, even though you could follow the reasoning and would say, the user has asked me to do blah, blah, blah between this date. And then it would say, oh, I passed null. I should pass the actual date. And then it goes and passes null again. And it just looped over and over and over. And so I had 3 models that just absolutely could not complete that. Just flat out couldn't figure it out.
Wow.
I had 3 models that were like really slow. So what surprised me was GPT-5 Nano was really slow. So was GLM. And for the people that are in the know, you'll know these ones. For everybody else, they're well known in the coding circles. People know who GLM is. People know what the GPT-5 Nano and stuff like that. My favorite actually was Grok. Grok was fast. It was fast, and it just did the thing. And I actually have been able to hand off tasks to Grok that were other models were struggling to do. So I gave it a specific time range, and I said, I need you to update this time range, right, from, I don't know, 2021 to 2022. I want you to do it in 7-day increments. Every time that you get to the end of a month, pause for 300 seconds so that I don't end up triggering a bad thing on the API, right? And I don't get an API ban. Almost all the models that I tried couldn't do this. They would refresh correctly, right? It would do week by week. And then it would just get to the end of the month and then just start the next one. And some models would be like, well, he said he wanted weekly, but he also said like I should stop at the end of the month. So I'm just going to run the whole month tally. And like they were all over the map in terms of like being able to follow directions and stuff like that. Grok was really one of the only ones. Now, I should say I didn't use Opus. I know I'm getting into the weeds here, but Opus is the big, like giant model that everybody knows will work. It is like the forerunner by miles in my estimation, but it's also stupid expensive because of that. But anyways, all that to say is I went through walking this path, playing with the different models, seeing how they responded. And ultimately it was a really interesting experience because when I gave it, I also tried doing things like only giving it a skill. and that had really bad, really bad consequences because, so I asked it to delete a section of data, like a time frame of data. And one of the models was just like, so he's asked for this time frame, but that's just like, I just don't want to do that. So it deleted everything from that date backwards.
Well, Steve, you got a lazy AI there is what you got.
Yeah, exactly. At one model actually replied with, this job is too tedious, so I'm just going to do everything at once. Like it was all over the map. So yeah, I had a really interesting time, eye-opening time playing with various models.
Here's what I thought interesting about your experience, Steve. Last week after the show, for those of you that don't know, there's an interactive mumble room. You can learn more by going to docs.mindtrip1.com, and there is an outline of how you'd get connected and all the rest of it. But after the show, a bunch of nerds hang out. We all talk about what we've been doing in the week and cool things we've done and what things we're excited about. And a very organic and awesome discussion came out of that last week by way of MCP servers versus skills. So I guess before we can talk about that, I need some ground level knowledge. Can you talk to me about what a token is and what it means to engineer a prompt to leverage an economy of tokens?
So a token, I guess you can think of a token in the most general sense to be analogous to a word. It's more correct to say that a token is closer to a syllable. So the word indivisible would be 3 tokens just because of the way that it splits it up. And this is very broad stroke because every model handles tokenizing words differently. But at a general rule, 1 token for 1 word is kind of where you can think about. And the reason for this is because the reason why this matters is because all models are judged on the number of tokens per second that they can either output or input or reason through, whatever it is. Not only that, unless you're on one of those kind of all-you-can-eat plans, and even those have like 5-hour sliding windows. So you can do so much in that 5-hour window, and then you got to take a break so that you're not hammering them too much. So every plan has either you pay per token or you have that sliding window of a maximum number of tokens that you can use. And so when you're talking about working with the economy of tokens, you're thinking about things like how can I get this down to execute with the least amount of cost possible? And some of the ways you can do it are quite obvious, like telling it to be terse. Do not write me a novel every time you give me a response, because that costs you tokens every time it does that. So in general, that's the link between tokens and your cost.
Okay, so with that in mind, the discussion last week was whether or not to use MCP or skills. So can you talk to me about what an MCP is, what a skill is, and why you believe, more so now this week than last week, that MCPs allow you to kind of put a box around it and achieve your goal of engineering prompts that seek to economize the tokens that you expend?
So I'll do my best to give myself like 2 minutes to box this in, because this is like a whole topic. But
awesome.
In general,
we got 37 minutes. You're good.
An MCP server it stands for Model Context Protocol, and essentially this is a way that it's almost like providing, either you can think of it either as functions or API, depending on what jives with your brain better. And they're very defined paths of like, if I call this tool, I will get this response. Just like calling this function will always give me this output, or this API will always give me that call. And the purpose of this is for you to be able to give your agent the ability to talk to something. Now, usually an MCP server is to talk to something remote. So it's a client server sort of thing. And the MCP server can run locally or it can run on the remote thing. But generally speaking, an MCP server is used to talk to something remote, such as Home Assistant has an MCP server that you can optionally install so that you can talk to Home Assistant through that functionality. Gmail, all of these places often have MCP servers in order for you to be able to do specific functions. Okay, they are an MCP server is coded in a language, doesn't matter, Python, Go, you name it, whatever it is, and they expose very specific functionality. And then the bot can query the MCP server to find out what each endpoint does. And so that it knows, I call this one to delete, I call that one to refresh, and so on. A skill is more similar to, I would call it more like a wiki. It's a markdown file that lives inside of your AI description, whether it's your code editor or wherever it is, that describes something. It can describe an MCP server and tell it what the endpoints are. It can tell it how to use those endpoints. It can tell it when or when not to use them, and all of those sorts of things, so that it's a way for it to understand how to interact with an MCP server. It can also, just like a wiki, it could also be exactly like a tutorial. You start at the top, like, this is how I do a thing. You give it the commands, you give it a description, you give it like all of this information about how you would go about training somebody to do the job. Now, the skill is much easier to write because it's just a markdown file, and it is just whatever it is that you want to tell the bot. And there's some variance in your ability to communicate properly to the bot, but generally speaking, it's a markdown file that tells it how to do a thing. The difference between the MCP server and the skill in today's context that we're talking about today is that a bot, the AI, cannot do more than what the MCP server allows it to. So when the bot decided to take my date and delete all the way back into history, if I had have had that on an MCP server instead of a skill, what would have happened is if the MCP server said, you can only delete 7 days at a time, I would have been able to catch and stop that from before it deleted all of my eternity. When it used the skill, what happened was the bot just decided, you know what, I don't want to do all this work to figure out what my date range is and how to call this properly, so I'm just going to delete the entire thing. And it issues the database appropriate command to do that recursive delete. If I tried to stop that, I would either have to break into the database and essentially kill the command, because stopping the bot doesn't do anything. It would just simply, because the command has already been processed by the database and it's currently churning through deleting the data. If the bot had to write 700 queries about how to go about deleting that same amount of data in 7-day chunks, I could stop the bot and I'd still have some data loss, but it wouldn't have impact like that. It wouldn't be a stored procedure running in the database that's just going to continue to run regardless of what happens. Mm-hmm. So that would have been extremely helpful in this case.
So it's essentially, it gives you control to. So first of all, let me back up a little bit. And again, pardon my ignorance here, because I'm learning. I'm learning with you, and so MCP is specific to AI. Model Context Protocol is a thing that is specific to AI, machine learning AI, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so you can achieve a similar thing either by way of building skills or using MCP. Your choice is to use both because it lets you take advantage of the skills, but lets you constrain them via the MCP that you wouldn't be able to constrain if it were just an outright skill.
That's correct. Like I watched models that while you're watching their reasoning, it literally would just be like, no, I didn't feel like doing that. Or would get confused and say things like, well, the user asked me to do this week by week, but they wanted a monthly report. So I'm just going to do the whole month at once. And the variance at which they follow your skill to the letter really depends on the model and how well behaved it is. And it has been my experience that the well-behaved models are less good at doing the planning. So if you're really good at following the instructions, you're less good at doing the planning, which makes a big difference when you're trying to give it a task that it needs to think about. And so, all of this is just my observations as opposed to anything scientific, but
no, sure.
That's just what I have observed.
But here's the thing though, that one of the things that you told me and that I found to be really helpful as I'm evaluating and or thinking about AI, is that it is not really helpful to just dig in blindly. It's more helpful to go scratch a real itch. It's more helpful to go find a very specific thing that you're trying to achieve, and then go achieve it. And that allows you to really get, and so back to your sneaker example, right? Like, it is, the future has arrived, my friend, where you want to ask your technology, how many miles did I run? And based off of the thing that you wear and the tracking that comes with it and all the rest, it can figure out and get you an answer to your question.
And that's useful.
Right. I mean, it's kind of the dream, right? Like, it's one of those things where I can't remember who it was that bounced this idea off of me, but it's stuck in the recesses of my brain, and it's like a mind splinter. I've not been able to get rid of it. If you think about it, email is kind of outdated at this point, right? Like, very rarely, if as far as like real-time communication, it's not great. And as far as asynchronous communication, oftentimes I'm not necessarily so much trying to communicate a series of messages. I'm oftentimes trying to move something from one place or the other, right? I'm trying to say, we had this meeting and here's the notes, or you signed up for this thing and here's the date that it's effective, or here's the insurance card, or here's the thing, right? There's typically another thing, and email is just the medium by which we do that. Wouldn't it be great if the world got to a place where all the email came in and it stripped all the things out and it put the text in a place so you can get to it, and stripped the attachments out and put those in a place that you got to it, and then context searched it and cataloged everything so that when I go look for car insurance, my car insurance thing is just there, and it's a database entry with a reference to the PDF that has my insurance cards in it. And maybe some logic that says, if the expiration date is, gets within 30 days or something, fire a thing off to say, hey, we haven't heard from your insurance company that, your car insurance is about to expire. All of those things, it seems like there is a next generation on the way by leveraging AI and leveraging some of these things that will allow the existing things that we have, not necessarily to replace humans, but just to make humans more efficient.
I mean, that's ultimately the hope. And I suppose we don't want to make the whole conversation about AI, but one of the things that I wanted to kind of put out there is I've been hearing a lot of people talk about the environmental costs of AI, and that is absolutely a thing that we need to contend with, especially as someone that is objecting to the fact that a data center is coming into my city, like a hyperscaler data center is coming into my city. There's a lot of challenges that come with it. But on the flip side, all of the technology that we enjoy did not start out being ecologically friendly. And it just didn't, right?
Yeah, it wasn't the goal.
We as humans have always gotten a product out the gate and then iterated on it and made it better. Like, you look at cars or trains or planes or anything that nowadays most people would consider essential. We are not necessarily worried about the environmental impact that these things are having on a day-to-day basis like we do with AI, because it's new and it's in the terrible phase. Legitimately, I'm not downplaying it, right? Mm-hmm. I'm just saying that there's been a lot of technology advances even in the last couple of months that are doing things like allowing the amount of RAM that's required to run these things to be cut down by 75%. So like the demand will seed the innovation. We're just not at the point where the innovation has caught up and allowed it to become more ecological. Because believe me, nobody wants to pay NVIDIA's prices. Nobody wants to pay that, right? And so people are working on this. It's just going to take its time for us to figure out how to do this in a more responsible manner. And yeah, terrible things are going to happen in between. But I also think that the level of productivity, and I don't mean like white collar productivity, but research and all of the rest of that could hugely benefit from this technology once it becomes somewhat sustainable, will probably be a net benefit overall.
The interesting thing is, you are by no means a tree hugger, and yet at the same time, you are not a wasteful person. And I don't think it has to be either or, right? I think that you can be conscious of the fact of you. I think you use the term boiling the ocean, like and in jest. But the idea being that if there's a more economical way to do this, if there's a more responsible way to do this, well, why wouldn't we do it that way?
Absolutely.
So, you want to hit some feedback?
Let's do it.
Our first email comes in from all the way back up here to the top. Jason. Jason writes in and says, "Hi, Noah and Steve. I've used different file systems over the years, but I'm a bit curious on what the best practices for people that use copy on write file systems are. Is it a good idea to use ZFS or Btrfs with databases or hard disk for virtual machines? I know that snapshots make backups nice, but what kind of performance hit does one take? Would it make more sense to run a copy on write file system that is used for gaming? If copy on write is fine for the above scenarios, are there certain settings that need to be turned off? I just want to see if there's any benefit to using these file systems outside of a NAS or data storage. Thanks for making a great show, Jason." So, Steve, in my mind, I divide this up into three separate things that we're talking about here. We're talking about virtual machines, we're talking about databases, and we're talking about file systems, primarily ZFS and Btrfs. Do you agree with that summation? And if so, what would you tell Jason if you were sitting on your doorstep with a cup of coffee and asking for advice?
I'd say sit down. We're in for a long one. Do you want to Irish that up a little bit? No. So there is a lot of benefit that comes from copy on write file system. One of the side benefits is the level of compression that they bring. The reason why that's important is because when you have compressed data, our systems are fast enough now that the compressed data going into your CPU becoming uncompressed and back into RAM is so fast, it's actually more performant than having the uncompressed data sitting on your disk and having to read all of that. And so one of the kind of splash on effects, it's not specifically about the copy on write, but both of the copy on write file systems we're talking about here have that compression and have really good compression, which means you're going to get better performance pulling files off your disk. As for performance in general, especially for things like gaming, there isn't really a whole lot to worry about there. Games get loaded into RAM and they don't get played off the disk, generally speaking. You'd have a bad time. And more than your file system, it's more likely going to boil down to, do I have an NVMe, an SSD, or a spinning Rust drive, right? On top of that, you're not going to notice a ton for everyday usage. In my logical thinking, now that there's no science behind this, but my logical thinking, copy on write is likely to be a little bit more performant, because when you pick up a block and you write it in a new spot, you're not having to rewrite the file that is in the existing spot. That's the whole purpose on copy on write. It means that I pick up a block, I write it, and then I write it to a new sector in the hard drive. And because of that, I'm not continuously overwriting the original blocks. And that's part of the reason that snapshots work and all of that kind of stuff. Now, I am not Alan Jude or anyone who does professionally work with ZFS. Let me qualify that. I do not have a business that works with ZFS. I run into it in my profession, and it is definitely useful, but I'm not, like, they don't call me in to tune this thing. So that's my disclaimer, right?
So talk to me about what a record size is and what the correlation, if any, is to a page size inside of a database.
So the record size, there's a couple of things that we need to talk about when you are first formatting your disk. Now, I'm going to talk about the ZFS perspective. I do have Btrfs running on my laptop because it's running Fedora, so I have a tiny bit of experience there. But mostly from the ZFS perspective, when you're formatting your disk, there is a block size on the disk that gets reported to the file system. These should align. So one of the the fastest ways to kill performance is to have that file system not align with the underlying blocks. And it has to do with the efficiency of the head or the seeking of the hard drives and where the file system actually puts its boundaries. So that's number one. In ZFS, this is controlled by the A shift. We're not going to get into it, but if you want to look into that, your A shift parameter when you create the ZFS file system changes depending on the whether it's an NVMe, a SSD, a spinning rust, and so on. So that's the first bit. The reason why that's important is because that dictates the block size of the actual blocks on disk. Then you have record sizes, and the record sizes are essentially, you can think of these like buckets, okay, or pails, or however you want to think about that. Where I have a pail, and the pail can hold 10 liters of water, right? I have a bunch of water that I have to store, but it's only 7 liters of water. Well, it's going to take that whole 10 liter bucket to hold that 7 liters of water. So I've got 3 liters left over, right? It doesn't get put, you don't then take another liquid and put it in that bucket until it's full. You would grab another 10 liter bucket and then fill it. And so your record size is directly related to how big of files am I storing. If I am storing large files, like gigabytes in size, and I have a small record size, it means that I am then paging the disk a ton of times, because a 10 gig file with 8K record sizes is a lot of 8K records. And it makes all that up. Conversely, if you say tune your record size to be 1 meg and most of your files are small text files or something like that, you're wasting a lot of space. And so you'll run out of disk space a lot faster. Now, all of that said, inside of the database itself has different sizes for the types of files that it might use. So Postgres uses an 8K page size, MySQL 16, Oracle's 8 by default, can be something else. All of these sorts of things indicate the block size, for lack of a better way of putting it, that the database is going to put on your hard drive and then try and read from and write to. And so if these are misaligned, the database is going to cause a lot more IOPS than what it needs to. So that's the answer to your question.
Talk to me about SSDs versus spinning rust for databases. This is a lesson that I learned firsthand, and I think I was pretty open and honest about it on the show back when I learned this lesson. Why does the speed of the disk matter greatly when you're talking about databases?
So generally speaking, when a database has a lot of random IOPS, right? So the data is not necessarily stored all sequentially, or even if it is stored sequentially, when you are doing lookups and joins and stuff like that, they're not going to be stored in the same sectors of the hard drive. Why does this matter? Well, if you think about a spinning rust hard drive, there's actually a little head inside of there, and it moves back and forth as the disks are spinning around in order to find the right sectors to retrieve the information from. If that head is going crazy because it's doing random I/O, it means that it has to move a lot. And the more that the head has to move, the less efficient that is. SSDs don't have a head. They just have electrically charged cells in them where the controller just knows there's a mapping in the controller and it just reads that specific cell. And so notwithstanding the fact that, you've got 7,200 or 10,000 RPMs in a spinning disk and magnitudes faster on SSDs, you also don't have the seek problem. So for a database that is doing a lot of low latency random IOPS, the SSD is by far the superior choice.
So hopefully that gives you something to get started with, Jason. So you would likely want to use SSDs. Let's talk about VMs and ZFS. Good idea, bad idea, or can be okay. You just have to know what you're doing.
I think that it's a good idea. What you want to avoid is having a copy on write file system inside the VM. So your hypervisor or shared storage or whatever has the copy on write file system. Then you've got some sort of container, whether it's QCOW2 or a raw disk. Then inside of that is where the operating system gets installed, and then it puts down a file system. You don't want to have ZFS or Btrfs on top of ZFS or Btrfs, because you end up having a double copy on write, and that will cause a pretty substantial, or could cause a pretty substantial hit in your performance on the VMs. This is kind of a really big topic, but the short answer here is, if you're looking for the best path in terms of performance, you'd have ZFS, a raw disk, and then, I don't know, I like XFS over ext4, but whatever. Pick your non-copy on write file system of choice in the VM. That's going to give you the best performance path. Although if you look into it, unless you're running thousands of these things and you're trying to squeeze every last ounce out of it, there's definitely a trade-off between using a raw disk, which allocates the entirety of the amount at the time that the VM is created, versus the QCOW, which can grow with you. And so there's some penalty to using a QCOW. For me, it has never been at all an issue. I use the QCOW, and that's just the way that I go. And I run dozens of VMs, not hundreds. So I suppose that your mileage will vary.
Because it is relevant and dovetails greatly into our next question. D writes in and says, "Hey, Noah and Steve, first time writing in, but I've been listening since episode 50. I'm a big fan. My question is this. I'm building a RAID Z array for my truck. I have to be able to access local media in remote areas while hunting and camping. I found an 8-bay JBOD enclosure that I will manage with my laptop, but I'm having trouble deciding whether to move forward with mirrored pairs in a RAID Z3. I've received conflicting answers on this from my online searching, so I'm asking my more tech-oriented friends online. I'll keep a full backup at home. My worry is more based on redundancy. When I'm out in the wilderness for days or weeks at a time, the enclosure bouncing around off-road, any help or advice would be appreciated, as I'm momentarily paralyzed due to not wanting to change the setup in the future. Thanks for all your shows, D." So, Steve, where are you in the mirrored pair vote? You think that's the way to go?
I do. I went with mirrored pairs. So I migrated off the RAID Z and moved to mirrored pairs a couple of years ago. It's more expensive, but ultimately I felt like the trade-off was worth it. Also, I have some performance concerns with the RAID Z stuff for the type of work that I'm doing. And so for me, between the extra security of, now I'm not going to run a 3-wide RAID Z3. I feel like that's just, if I'm going to do that, then I might as well just do mirrored pairs and then stripe across them.
So I've largely landed on the same thing. First of all, from a conceptual standpoint, I just think mirrored pairs are easier. And that doesn't necessarily matter for you. That doesn't necessarily matter for me. But my gosh, has the conversation with clients gone down significantly since I've gone away from explaining what VDEVs are? Hey, you got drives and they store copies of each other. So if one guy goes down and you got another guy that's doing the same thing, it's like, oh, like twins. Yeah, right. Like twins. And then if you want to add more, just do it in pairs. Oh, like sets of twins. Exactly. Like sets of twins. And it's like, it clicks. It's a thing that people can get their head wrapped around. And so again, not necessarily relevant to this audience, but the conversation, it's just much easier to explain to people. The other part of it is just a better way to go, both from performance and from a reliability standpoint. The performance is going to be better. And if we built a storage device for a guy, and we don't have any sort of ongoing agreement. So he basically just calls us when he needs us, and he called and he's like, yeah, I think I'm running out of space. And so we went over there and looked, and my goodness, Steve, like a whole bunch of the drives inside of the server were dead. But guess what? He didn't know, because the pool was running just fine. And so building things in mirrored pairs just buys you extra time, extra performance, extra everything. Now, it is more expensive, right? It's a more expensive nut to crack to do it that way. It is a harder road to hoe. However, I think the juice is worth the squeeze every day and twice on Sunday. And if I were building something inside of a truck and it were bouncing around, I would absolutely build this with RAID pairs. Now, let me ask you this. Ordinarily, when we talk about storage, if you're not talking about, VMs, if you're not talking about, particularly if you're talking about like media and stuff like that, it's okay oftentimes to throw stuff on spinning rust. If you were going to have a box bouncing around the back of the truck, would you do spinning rust or would you spring for some SSDs?
I would try to get the SSDs. There are some things that you can do, non-standard things that you can do in order to try and reduce the impact of bouncing, right? Because what you're worried about is the heads getting misaligned on the spinning rust. You're not worried about them being damaged or whatever, but if the heads get misaligned, because you remember, like, these things are sensitive to within a hair's width. One
micron. It travels 1 micron above the reed head travels 1 micron above the platter.
And so there are some things that you can do. You probably are not reasonably going to do them, but one of the things you can do is suspend them on, I'm going to say elastics, just so you can understand what I'm talking about. And like, if you are extreme about this, you would have that so that they're not even getting vibration off the case, right? Like, the really extreme view of these are a professionally, I guess you could call them a hammock. I would caution you against that unless you really know what you're doing. I have seen it. I would, unless you've got like, hey, I need to store 5 terabytes worth of stuff, and have you seen the prices of SSDs right lately? If that's your case, then I guess sometimes you have no other option other than good backups.
So I did a quick DuckDuckGo search. I was wrong. It's 5 nanometers. So it's 0.005 microns above. I mean, it's unbelievably tight tolerances that you're talking about. And so all that to say, your truck going over some rocks and that big thud is like the equivalent of Mount Everest to this reed head as it's trying to stay, right above this right above this platter. And the flight height, as it's called, is just it's just teeny tiny stuff. So hopefully that helps. We'll have some links for you in the show notes. You sounded like you have a NAS bay. So I won't bore you with this detail, but if there's somebody else out there that's looking, I have landed on the Ugreen DXP 2800 for when we have clients that they just need an entry level NAS and they just want to do it for the lowest possible dollar amount. This thing is less than $400 out the door. You throw some drives in it. Again, mirrored pair, comes with a built-in boot drive, so you don't have to worry about that part of it. And there's just one small little special snowflake thing you have to do, function F12 to get into the UEFI, and then shut off the Watchdog service because they have their own little built-in applet that watches to see if the NAS is still responsive. And if it isn't, it restarts. Well, obviously, if you blow that away and install TrueNAS or Ubuntu or whatever on it, you're not going to have that little Watchdog application, so there's nothing to respond to. So the Watchdog service in the UEFI says, oh, I've gone 2 minutes and haven't heard. Must be frozen. I'll reboot it. And so the thing will just reboot every 2 minutes if you don't disable that. But you shut that off, function F12 to get in the boot menu, and it's just Robert becomes your father's uncle. You install whatever operating system you want. It's a little x86 machine. Absolutely fantastic. So I'll have links for you in the show notes, podcast.asknoahshow.com. Audrey writes in and says, hi, Noah and Steve. In the last few shows, you talked about authentication, LDAP, and FreeIPA. Recently, I found an amazing open source app that I started using in my home lab and for my clients. It's called Pocket ID, and he links to the GitHub. Pocket ID is an open source OpenID, OIDC. It's a server that doesn't require a password, only passkeys, and it enables single sign-on to all your apps, similar to OKTA, just for free and open source. It can integrate with any software that supports OIDC. OpenID is the greatest thing about it is that there is no password for users to forget. I use it to add single sign-on to a bunch of apps like Image, Bezel, Termux, Mealy, Audio Bookshelf, and many more. The great thing is you can incorporate it into Active Directory or IPA by syncing users and groups from LDAP. You can save passkeys in Bitwarden or other password manager that supports passkeys, latest version of YubiKey that supports WebAuthn. So that's supported if no password to remember. I'm not sure when the show is live, but if you like, we could try to schedule some time for me to come on and talk about it. Greetings, Arvi. So first of all, show is live Tuesday, 6 p.m. Central, and we would love you to run, not walk, not crawl, run over to us at Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central. And if that doesn't work, Steve and I would love the opportunity to try to make a time that does work for you that we could maybe pre-record something. Steve, are you familiar with Pocket? And if so, did Pocket ID tickle your fancy when you read about it?
I am not familiar with it. I mean, I put this in the show docs, but aside from that, my time has not been focused on SSO.
You're a very pragmatist, right? You focus on the things that move the needle for you and what's actually there. Archer72 writes in and says that he has a problem with MakeMKV and gives the error and screenshots. I believe just skimming here. This is a response to the guy that called in asking about the Blu-ray drive. Is that your understanding?
I'm not really sure. This one got put in by one of our producers.
So I'm going to go ahead and guess that the 9 out of 10 times when you're dealing with MakeMKV, if you have a problem is with the drive. So I would try starting there. Atypical says, what is the best way to add AV codecs into Endless OS? So this is kind of a struggle that you've been fighting, Steve. How do you get stuff into an immutable operating system that doesn't design to have stuff in it because it's immutable?
Well, I haven't cracked this particular one. The other stuff is kind of workaround. So, for example, you can create a systemd unit and drop a single binary on there like Tailscale and be effective in that way and get it up. I don't know how I would do this other than wrapping it all in a Flatpak that has all of that with it. Because of the Flatpak sandboxing, I don't think that you can just install a Flatpak with the codecs and then expect other Flatpaks to know where they are and go get them.
Yeah. I would say once you want to start customizing, that's time to... That is what has taken me off of Endless OS in certain circumstances. Once I need to start customizing stuff, HP printing really kind of hosed it for me. But once you need to start customizing stuff, once you need to start adding stuff that isn't there, the suggestion is to move to something where it is. 2-Bit says, what are your thoughts on Access door stations? Good, bad, or ugly? If you're talking about the Access door stations by way of the intercoms, I absolutely love them. We install the 8000 series all the time. I've had nothing but good experiences with them. They support triggering a door unlock either by way of an API or via a closed contact system. So they'll interface with anything from these old systems that are from the 1980s, 1990s, all the way up to modern things. It is, and everything about it is standard. The camera's ONVIF, the intercom is just SIP. So you can tie it to a door intercom station, you can tie it to a phone, you can have it call whatever. I mean, it can literally tie into just about anything.
From the Linux Newswire newsroom, this is the Week in Review with JT.
For the week of April 12th, 2026, here's the Linux and open source news. PZIP 11.0 is out. GNU Nano 9.0 is now available. The KDE team has announced the release of KDE Frameworks 6.25, as well as KDE Plasma 6.6.4, and OpenSSL 3.6.2 has been released with important security updates. In distro news, Xstix 26.4 is out, Plop Linux 26.2 has been released, Snarl Linux 1.40 is available, ParaOS NiceCore 26.4 is out, and Triskel 12 has been released. In open source AI news, ZAI has announced GLM 5.1, a new open source LLM under the MIT license that matches top models by Anthropic and OpenAI on benchmarks. And NVIDIA has launched Icing, the world's first open AI models to accelerate the path to useful quantum computers. And lastly, France has launched its government Linux desktop plan as its Windows exit begins. France is transitioning government desktops to Linux, with each ministry required to formalize its implementation plan by autumn 2026.
Rounding out our discussion with AI is AI in healthcare. Several Californians have sued Sutter Health and Memorial Care this week over allegations that the AI transcription tool that they used to record them without their consent is in violation of state and federal law. The proposed class action lawsuit filed on Wednesday in federal court in San Francisco states that in the past 6 months, the plaintiffs have received medical care at various different facilities. When activated, the software captures, transcribes, and summarizes the conversation between patients and doctors, then turns them into clinical notes. So, Steve, what do you think about AI being used in healthcare? Is this the greatest thing ever? Because you shared with me, I think last week or a few weeks ago, that you use AI transcription with great success, particularly when you're time constrained, and it actually helps you able to serve people better. And yet, this has got to be loaded with pitfalls.
Well, so first of all, I don't think that any hospital is running their own local whisper transcription thing, which is completely different. They're going to be farming that out to somebody else.
They are.
And we don't know what that's like, right? So if you are transcribing in real time and not storing the audio, then I, not being a lawyer, think that the transcriptions would be the same thing as trying to subpoena a doctor's notes. However, when they're going out to a third party and the third party super duper promises that they're not going to use it for testing on, oops, by the way, it got used for testing or got ingested or whatever. We also don't know, can the third party be subpoenaed? Like, can you subpoena the AI? Because I guarantee that they're probably not just running a whisper service. They're probably storing it so that the doctors can chat with it or do some sort of manipulation or whatever it is with it. Mm-hmm. And what happens then? Like, who has access to that data? We know that HIPAA or your local equivalent has very strong privacy for traditional doctors, but we don't know what it's going to do.
Yeah,
so I don't like it.
Yeah, I don't either. And the other thing that I think is terrifying is that we have slowly eroded the concept of informed consent, right? And we've done that in a couple different ways. The first thing that we've done is where it used to be they would hand you a sheet and say, Mr. Evans, I need you to sign here on this one page that says that we're going to release these records circled up here to this facility circled down here, and we need your signature on this particular date if in fact you agree for us to do that, and then hand you a pen and hand you the sheet, and then you sign it, and then your records go from one hospital to the next. There is a service called Epic Everywhere that our local hospital does by default. You might want to check with yours. And effectively what they do is they, with or without you asking, send a copy of your medical record to every other hospital that uses Epic through a service called Epic Everywhere. And so we're already struggling to rein this stuff in. And now, before we have any laws to regulate AI, before we've gotten anything really wrapped up by way of patient privacy, now it feels like we're going to make it worse. I just don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that if we learn to do this right, it'll be a good accelerant. But the problem is we as humans learn to do it lazy.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, and you know what? We're teaching the robots to be lazy too. Just look at your experience. You got a lazy robot. That's what the boat we're in. All right, hey, the music in our ears. You know what that means? That means we're out of time. Time has come to a conclusion, but never fear. The entire episode, as well as all the episodes back to episode 1, they're all available for you at podcast.asknoahshow.com. While you're there, hey, check out the show notes. You know what's in there? A lot of stuff that we didn't have time to get to, but you'll get to it by going to podcast.asknoahshow.com. And if you can join us live, please do so by going to Ask Noah Show, 6 p.m. Tuesday. We'll see you next week. AskNoahShow.com.